Hi guys, welcome to UNSTEM's first episode of STEM SESH, where we spend a session exploring the wonderful world of STEM. Today we are dipping our feet into industrial engineering. I'm Lizzie, UNSTEM's president, and one of your hosts for today.
And I'm Angie, UNSTEM's head of organizing and also the other host today. Before we are starting with the main event, we would also like to introduce UNSTEM and our guest speaker to those who are unfamiliar. UNSTEM is a club created because STEM is an ever-changing field of study that has been very difficult for both women and non-cisgender individuals, as they are treated with less respect and presented with fewer opportunities in the field. Our team believes that expanding on gender representations and making this field accessible to everyone is crucial to creating equality. To do this, we host events such as this STEM Sesh and post about gender minorities in STEM so that they can become more recognized and people are more aware of them.
But enough about us. Let's move on to our guest speaker for today. She's an Alfred Thurno professor in the Department of Industrial and Operations Engineering at the University of Michigan, where she also holds an appointment in the Department of Healthcare. Her research interests are mainly in applications of combinatorial optimization to the challenges of optimization problems with many objective criteria, as well as the fields of aviation and healthcare. Please welcome Professor Amy Cohn.
Go blue.
Hi. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Amy Cohn, and I am, as you said, a professor at the University of Michigan. I actually split my time in three ways at work. I teach and do research in the field of operations research, largely teaching undergraduates, which I love. Part of my time is running a center called CHEPS, or the Center for Healthcare Engineering and Patient Safety. And in that center, I work with students, both engineering students, pre-med students, public health students, nursing students, solving problems in our healthcare system and giving them hands-on real-world problem-solving experience. And then I have recently been appointed something called Chief Transformation Officer, which is kind of a fancy title at Michigan Medicine. And it really means coming into a very complex system and contributing the way I look at problems as a systems thinker and an engineer, but getting to do it with all of the amazing people who are making healthcare work. So it's a busy job, but an exciting job. And it really gives me a great chance both to let my students and to help my students understand all of the exciting things that they can do in medicine without having a medical or a nursing degree. And it also helps me to teach people in medicine that engineers can be really, really valuable in helping them to accomplish what they want, which is to have a well-balanced life while really impacting patients through better care.
Thank you for that, Amy. Welcome again. It is a pleasure to have you. As you know, we have prepared some questions that I'm sure aspiring industrial engineers like Lizzie out there are excited to know the answer to. So shall we dive into those?
All right, there are 4 categories of questions, and we'll start with the first one, the introductory category. So, Amy, you're in industrial engineering and in the medical field, right? So, what brought you into this?
That's a great question. And I'm going to sheepishly acknowledge that I'm sort of not an engineer.
Oh,
So two things. One, always bear in mind when you're talking to faculty that, professors are sort of teaching, not doing, although my job has really allowed me to be in practice working on real problems in our healthcare system. But I'll give you a tiny bit of my background. We've talked a little bit about being a minority, and when I was in high school many decades ago, I was definitely in that position of loving math. I loved physics, and I would look around the room and go, boy, people don't look very much like me. And so that can be kind of intimidating, but I loved math. And so when I went off to college, I started off studying math, and I was in a pure math department. And boy, did nobody look like me. And not only did they not look like me, but they didn't act like me. I'm a really social person.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids, and I really, like spending time with my friends and like doing things with my family. And I didn't feel at that point in time that my personality really kind of fit in. But I also found that the work I was doing, and I'm going to tell long stories, so you're just going to have to cut me off when we run out of time. But what I found was, yeah, I really like. I love puzzles. I love games. Math to me is a puzzle that's interesting, and I like working my brain the way some people like hitting a golf ball, right? It's like a muscle that I'm using. But I found majoring in math to be really lonely. That like you couldn't really talk to your friends about, this linear algebra stuff you were doing. Like the word matrix didn't really go over very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also felt like for me, and I don't want to disparage, my older son just finished a math major and it was like the perfect fit for him, and he's brilliant and awesome. But for me, I felt both isolated and I felt selfish. I was really lucky to grow up in an environment that gave me tremendous opportunities. I had a tremendous support system. And to study something just because it felt like a fun game to me, like the world is a challenging place, and I wanted to feel like I had a more direct impact. So I wanted to be able to explain what I do to people, and I wanted to be able to have what I do really change lives. And so I was lucky to have an advisor who said, maybe you should take some operations research courses. And operations research is kind of, linear industrial engineering, systems engineering, operations research, they all kind of blur together. But basically what he introduced me to was the idea of using mathematics to solve real problems, and problems that you could explain to people. So I can go to a cocktail party and say, I study, combinatorial something, 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 and everyone kind of goes, ugh. But if I say, I use math to try and make airplanes not be so late, or I try and use math to help fewer kids have asthma attacks, then people kind of go, oh, that's interesting. So the long and the short of it is I kind of stumbled into industrial engineering as a way to use math and the sort of structured way my brain naturally works to solve problems that I felt were important and interesting and impacted the world. And then I just kept going. And I just kept getting opportunities. And eventually I ended up as a professor. So the embarrassing thing is I don't have an industrial engineering degree. I have a math degree, and then my PhD was in operations research. But I'm getting the benefit of learning as I go.
That's so interesting that you started from like math, but you ended up being an industrial engineering professor. Like, I think there was a lot that came in your journey that led you to like the perfect destination of where you could help and support other students. And I just find it really inspiring. You just really don't know where life could take you to.
Yes. So let me ask you a question. Are you guys list makers? Do you make lots of lists? Have you
Yes.
ever put something on a list that you've already done because then you could check it off?
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, yeah.
Okay. Have you ever made a list that included making another list? Like my things to do for the holidays list will include make
Yes.
a list of
Oh
the
my
Christmas
God.
cards, make a list, right? Um,
Yeah.
as an engineer, I tend to think about, I tend to organize things. I have a plan, I have a backup plan, I have a
Yeah.
plan for if my backup plan fails. And so one piece of advice I'd give to you all is that if you're innately built that way, it's a superpower, but it's a superpower that also comes at some risk because you can get really locked into, but I had a plan. And I was doing airline projects and collaborating with airlines and doing research and teaching my students about airlines. And someone came along and said, we'd like you to help us improve our health system. And my first reaction was, oh, that sounds really valuable. At the time, I had a beloved aunt who was very ill, and I was really frustrated with her, delays in getting appointments. It felt impactful. And my second reaction was, but that's not in the plan. Like, that's not on the chart. And so I had to take a big leap of faith and say, I'm going to do something different than the plan. Be open to that. Be open to saying, you know what? I didn't know this thing existed. Let me try it out. You can fail and then you can go do something else. It's okay. But, plans are your superpower as long as you're not too locked into them.
So you kind of already answered this, but to be just more specific, was being an engineer a career you've always wanted to pursue since the beginning, or was it sort of a trial and error until you discovered a passion for it?
It was a little of both. I didn't really think about engineering in the sense that neither of my parents were engineers. I didn't have family friends who were engineers in the way that you might, your next door neighbor's a doctor and like that she goes in and does surgery, or, the guy next door is a baker and you know what it means. Like, I didn't have any sense of what does it mean to be an engineer. And I think, frankly, I probably thought engineers are cars. Engineers are like, making stuff. And I don't actually like to make stuff with my hands. I'm not a robotics person. I don't like to kind of, play with gadgets. It's all conceptual for me. But I did have this sense of structure that I think is inherent in engineering. And so I think I knew all along that I wanted to do something that was very conceptual. I think my whole kind of mode of being is thinking about, I'm one of those people that anything I do, I'm thinking about the right way to do it. If I'm going from, the kitchen to the living room, I'm thinking, should I carry my cup of tea in my right hand so that with my left hand I can pick up the remote control? It took me a long time. Actually, it took me being married for a long time to realize that that's not a normal every person brain. Like people do stuff differently than I do that just fascinates me. So I think like since birth, I was an engineer. I just had to eventually like come to accept it.
Can you share about your academic and professional journey that brought you into this position? And what would you have done differently?
That's a great question. I would have given myself more of a break, and I would have been a little bit more trusting. So I think some of it's probably my personality. I'm a sort of naturally anxious type of a person. And some of it's the time I was growing up in, where it wasn't unusual that I was the only girl in the class, the only woman in the meeting. I felt like I had to be perfect. And looking back, there were times that instead of getting the A+, I could have gotten the A and a lot more sleep. Or I could have gotten an A- and done something really fun. I could have spent more time with friends. I could have taken better care of my body. I could have exercised more. And I'm pretty sure I would have ended up in the same place, or maybe even a better place. And I think for your generation, you guys are the same age basically as my kids. And you've been through COVID, and you've been through a lot of social turmoil and political unrest and climate issues and gun violence. And I think about the pressure I felt as a student, and then I add all of those things on top of it. It's a lot. It is a lot. And so I think if I could go back to my younger self, and I kind of vicariously do that with my kids and with my students, it's okay to try something new and fail. It's okay to do something halfway because it's not your top priority. And it's okay to kind of ignore some people. I think it's ironic that the people whose criticism tends to bother me most are people who I tend not to actually like or respect. And why is that? Right? Like, if my kids think I'm great, and my husband thinks I'm great, and my parents think I'm great, and my friends think I'm great, why should I care what some professor in some other, institution thinks? Or why should I care about what some colleague things. So I think those are the things, is I would just give myself a break, right? Be a little bit more patient with myself, be about a little bit more willing to take some risks, and to believe that it's going to be okay. It might not go to the place that I thought it was going to go, but that's okay. I'm going to be all right.
And on to the next question. How did you get into the public health field?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the biggest, as an industrial engineer, one of the things I love about the field is you can apply optimization techniques or simulation or lean to almost anything that has a process, right? And so we tend to think about manufacturing or transportation, but it can be anything: energy, health, education. And one of the things that I've always liked about this field is I can have my core toolkit of skills and then say, I'm bored. I want to learn about something totally new. So I've got a PhD student who wants to work on designing wind farms and what's the most efficient way to produce wind energy. Okay, I'm going to spend a year or two learning a lot about wind power and electricity markets and everything else. Okay, I'm going to learn about that. So I had always had some innate interest in health. And then basically what happened is my husband is a healthcare journalist. He writes about healthcare policy. And I can remember when President Obama was developing the Affordable Care Act. And this was a lot of what, as a society, healthcare is really important and funding is really challenging. This was going on a lot in the media. It was definitely going a lot in his work. And so we'd be talking at the dinner table. And I can remember my younger son was probably like 6 or 7 at the time. And he would talk about Professor Googly Oogly. And Professor Googly Oogly was actually a professor of economics whose name was sort of hard for him to pronounce, who was like the lead economist. And at some point, I was yelling at my husband. I was so frustrated. I was like, dude, this is the most complex system ever. It affects every single human being's life. It is 20% of the GDP. We are re-engineering the healthcare system. Our 7-year-old knows the name of the key economist. Who is the chief engineer for re-engineering the health system? Like, who's Obama's engineering team? So about 3 months later, the dean of engineering and the dean of medicine came to me and said, hey, we want to start a center on healthcare engineering, and we'd like you to help build it. And I went home and I said, like, how do I tell the dean no without getting into trouble? But like, I just got tenure. Our kids are finally off in school. Like, we don't have diapers anymore. I want to slow down a little. Like, how do I say no? And he burst out laughing. And he said, Amy, you've been begging for this. You keep complaining about no engineers in healthcare. Here you go. They're giving you the keys. Like, go. And it was a big jump for me. It was a really scary jump. I was like, okay, what do you want this center to be? And they said, we don't know. Like, there are so many opportunities, just build something. And it was maybe one of the top 3 best professional decisions I've made in my life. The work I do means somebody who's been diagnosed with ALS getting, hospice care. It means someone who needs emergency surgery getting flown to the right hospital. It means pregnant women getting the care they need without losing their jobs because they work at, a grocery store and they can't take the time off for prenatal visits. Like, it is real and tangible. And I've given birth to children. I've taken little kids to the emergency department when they whack their heads and need stitches. I have parents who need to see specialists. It feels really real to me to do healthcare. But I should never have been a nurse or a doctor.
It's so cool that even though it's not really your field of study, like you could incorporate things like industrial engineering to the healthcare field.
And there are so many opportunities. The students that are graduating from our program, they get snapped up for jobs like nothing because they have these technical skills that are so valuable, but they have also learned how the healthcare system works. And, it's not just knowing the technical stuff, it's understanding the culture that people are working in and the way people do their work. And, what is the impact of your nurses being unionized? Or what does it mean to be a community hospital versus an academic medical center? And so our students are amazing. I'm just so impressed by them. And they go out and they're like ready. They're ready to change the world. It's great.
Yeah, and not just like contribution, but I feel like you made such a big difference by how you use engineering and incorporating it into a whole different field where you didn't even study and major in. How you made a big difference is just truly, really inspiring to us.
What I
Yeah,
like about it is it forces you to work in collaboration. It forces you to be in partnership, right? So I don't know enough about pediatric asthma to solve this problem unless I find a pediatrician who wants to work with me and that I can help them understand how I think and I can understand how they think and we can learn from each other. And I'll be honest, I think one of the challenges right now um, for gender minorities in STEM is that sometimes group environments are not as conducive to collaboration as they need to be. And so this is an area that I think we really need to pay attention. And I think a lot of people are, and good things are coming. But finding opportunities to work in groups with people who are different than you are in a healthy, constructive way is super important. And so making sure that gender minorities are fully participating and given a full voice on group projects is just an enormous part of this. And when I talk to people, when I talk to students who are not in the majority about their experiences and the good and the bad, it seems like, unfortunately, one of the things that can be tough are different environments are not as welcoming for those partnerships. And so that's something that I'm definitely very committed to trying to help resolve. And also finding environments, like yours, where you're setting up this community that maybe that means that you recognize each other in a class and so you can be part of a project team together and support each other. Or maybe it means that you can at least be a sounding board. So you can come back and say, hey, I'm kind of having some problems with team dynamics. Have you experienced this? What have you learned from? And one of the things that I found, I was part of a women in medicine leadership program. It was like 2 years long where we met once a month and we did all sorts of training and everything else. And the biggest thing that came out of it was a lot of friendships and relationships. And one of the things we talked a lot about is there are times that your idea doesn't get heard or that someone else gets credit for the idea. But if you speak up, like if you don't say anything, you don't get credit. But if you speak up, there are a lot of cultural norms that, well, you're bragging or you're aggressive or you're right. And so, like, I've been trained my whole life to not kind of say, look at this great thing that I did. But if people don't know the great thing that I did, how can I move to the next stage? And so one of the things that we became very conscious of, and I'm gonna suggest to you as you're thinking about things like group dynamics, is we got comfortable with each other saying, I need your help to elevate me. So first of all, we got really good about watching so that if I was in a group and I saw Angie make a suggestion and nobody really listened to it, and then 10 minutes later, somebody else basically come up with the same idea, for Angie to say, but I already said that, you're kind of whining. But I can say, oh, that sounds exactly like what Angie was saying 10 minutes ago, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And there would be times that not only will we do that for each other, but I might say, hey, Lizzie, I'd really like to be, I think I should be nominated for this award.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it's something where you're allowed to self-nominate, I can't say like, I think I'm
Yeah.
deserving of this award. Would you suggest this? Because we could do it for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were taking away that stigma of, as women, we're not supposed to do this, that this isn't how we're expected to act. Well, then how do I get the stuff? So build those friendships and relationships and ways to help support each other. So when you see something, and do it with humor, I have found that that's my secret weapon. Is you don't want to be the angry person, but I learned to kind of chuckle and go, dude, seriously? You're like, dude, seriously, isn't that what Angie just said?
Yeah.
But you still say it.
All right, let's move on to the next category, which is getting into unis. I'm sure a lot of students who are very curious to know this. Do you have any tips for getting into dream universities?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned I have two sons who one just graduated last year from university, one just started this year at university. They've been through COVID and all of that stuff, and living in a community where, everyone spends a lot of time talking about college applications and everything else. And so the best advice that I got when my kids were like pre-high school that I keep coming back to is don't try to raise the kid that will get into their dream school. Try to raise a kid who will make any school they go to their dream school. And by that, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who get taught that to go to your dream school, and by the way, I'm going to tell you what your dream school should be, right? To get into your dream school, you have to start a club, or you have to take 6 AP courses, or you have to have this GPA, or you have to be, and so they do things not for the joy of doing the thing or for the value of doing the thing, but because they think that's the thing that will get them, not to the thing that they want, but the thing that they've been told they should want, because getting into the dream school will then get you, well, wait a minute, now that's getting you the dream job, or right? So my first piece of advice is, and it's hard, it's really hard, but keep coming back to yourself of what are my values? What are the things that are important to me? What does a good life look like for me? And then think about, it's not the school, it's the experience. So one example is you can go to a really big prestigious school, fancy name, really well known, but then end up being one of a million students who just kind of goes through anonymously. Or you might go to a small school that's less well known, but where you have the opportunity to, say, work with a professor or be involved in a student organization that you can really develop and grow. Now, that doesn't mean that the big prestigious schools are bad, but there are opportunities at any place you go to. So I'm going to start with try to pull back from this idea that there is one dream school, or that these schools are the good schools and these schools are the disappointing letdown failure schools. Wherever you go, it is up to you to say, how do I maximize the resources where I am? Every school has amazing resources. Sometimes they're harder to find, sometimes they're harder to get. Big schools, you might be competing with lots of, they talk about like certain med schools. Everybody in that med school was valedictorian of their high school class. Every one of them had a 4.0 in college. How do you then go do something unique and stand out? That being said, there are going to be schools that you're really excited about. And I think being genuine is really important. We can tell reading essays when it was sort of, crafted by an education consultant for the sake of getting in, like those consultants are helping other people write essays too. When I read an essay, I want to feel like I know who Angie is. And I think she has interesting things to offer. She doesn't have to already have all the accomplishments, because then why does she need to come to my university, right? So I want to say, oh, Lizzie would contribute something here, right? She would learn things here that allowed her to contribute to the world, but she would also contribute things while we're here. So what makes you unique or different? And I don't think you have to put, that like, check, I took this many AP courses, check, I got this score on my SAT or ACT, check, I founded a club, check, who are you and what do you want to gain from this experience? And it's okay to do this. Now, that's hard because for a lot of students, the world is telling them these schools are the perfect schools and anything else you failed. And you just got to come back to give yourself a break. It's okay to do a B plus on something, and you don't have everything be perfect at the expense of not doing things that are important to you.
That is a very good point. I've seen like a lot of students just check off the requirements list of their dream uni just to like give the perfect student image. But yeah, I think being true to themselves would give them more advantages in the future.
I used to joke, so my husband is a Miami Dolphins fan, right? And the joke I always make is that when we first started dating, I acted like I liked the Miami Dolphins. Now, they were good back then, so that made it a little easier, but I didn't even like football. And I ended up marrying a guy who thought that I wanted to watch football every Sunday, right? You got to be careful. I sometimes joke that, like, if you act differently when you start dating someone, if it goes well, then you're stuck acting that way, right? Like, don't dress in a way that you're not comfortable dressing. But the flip side is you're also going to end up with someone who wants somebody who likes football, right? So flip the narrative. And by the way, my husband is great, and he doesn't mind if I don't watch football, and I've actually started to like it. But that being said, flip the narrative. If this university values students who like check the box, is that the university I want to be at? If this university recognizes that students can be really great, but also struggle in certain areas and need to grow, that sounds like a good university to me, right? So that kind of like, it's not just about why would my dream school want me, but why should I want to go to you? Well, why should I want to go there? They should be lucky to get you.
So do you mind if we talk a little bit more in depth with industrial engineering?
Nope.
What does industrial engineering mainly do?
So industrial engineers do lots of things, but at its core, my way of thinking about industrial engineering is that we manage processes. So any idea you have or any invention you have, for it to be valuable, it has to actually be implemented in the world, and there has to be a process. And so let's think about healthcare. If I develop this really cool new treatment, I have to get patients to that treatment. So I have to figure out where to put the building, or I have to figure out where to build the machine, or I have to figure out how to schedule the patients. So industrial engineering implies industrial, right? An industry, but you can broadly, and I think that's why my department now calls itself industrial and operations engineering, is it's really about what is the operations of an activity and how can you make that as effective as possible. So scheduling things or allocating resources for things. Major League Baseball uses industrial engineers to figure out which team should play against who and which game should be at home and which should be away. Power systems use industrial engineering to figure out how do you switch between wind power and solar power and coal-based power. Hospitals use industrial engineering to make sure they have all of the supplies that they need to do surgery. They also use industrial engineering to say, when should you cancel elective surgery because you need to save beds in your hospital for people who are in car accidents that you weren't planning for. Taylor Swift's concerts get scheduled by industrial engineers. Industrial engineers try and figure out a better way to do ticket sales. anything that you can, the way I think about it is industrial engineers are the people who walk around the world going, this isn't done right. It could be better. Is we say this could be done better.
So this is quite an interesting question, actually. Do you think that the industrial engineering job is replaceable with sophisticated technology such as AI?
The easy answer is no. But I think industrial engineers can be really good at figuring out what is the right way to use AI. So I'll give you an example. When I was a little kid, if you wanted to go on a trip, so when I was 6 years old, we went to Disney World. And my parents called a travel agent on a telephone that had a wire, had a cord, and they talked to the travel agent, and the travel agent booked their plane tickets. Now I go to delta.com at 5 a.m. in the morning and I type in like Detroit to Boston, 4 p.m. on Thursday, and I can do all that stuff by myself. They've replaced the travel agent with technology to book basic flights. But if I want to go on a trip and my kids are going to come, but they're going to use frequent flyer miles, and my parents are going to meet us, but they're going to come from a different city, and I have to come back a day early, then I call Delta. So the Delta people who used to just make easy reservations for you can now focus on the things that really need human interaction, really need knowledge and creativity, which makes the jobs more interesting and rewarding and makes the system as a whole more economical and more effective. So a lot of what I'm interested in right now in healthcare is if I want to get a refill of the medication I've been taking for 20 years for a chronic condition, or I want to get the forms for my kid to go to summer camp, we can definitely use chatbots for that sort of thing. But if I want to get this prescription refilled, but I've also developed a new problem and I've also had some allergic reactions in the past, then I should actually talk to my doctor about it. So I think AI can help us to tease out, these are the things that are easy and straightforward, boom, just put them through the mill. These are the things that require a human being. Who's the right human being? Maybe it's not my doctor, maybe it's a pharmacist. Maybe my doctor partners with a nurse who can answer a lot of these questions. So I don't worry that, sometimes people say like chatbot's going to take over the world. No one's going to write essays in college anymore. Like we don't need people anymore. Chatbots, I don't know, maybe ChatGPT is listening to me. The poems, like the first time you see, oh, you can write a limerick that talks about, it's snowing in Michigan and I'm having chicken for dinner. Like that's really exciting. The poems aren't that beautiful. And the places where we need humanity, we're still going to have jobs. They're just going to be more interesting jobs.
For the last question, it's what does being a woman in STEM mean to you?
Oh, it means a lot. So number one, it means that I've achieved something that was hard, right? It means that I've overcome things that make me feel, that which does not kill you makes you stronger, kind of. I feel proud of what I've accomplished. So that's one thing. The second thing is I like to think that I have helped show that it doesn't have to look the way it's looked before. So I think there was a period where it was just sort of, a very majority sort of white male. This is what it needs to be an engineer. This is what you look like. This is what you act like. This is how you talk. This is what you do. And then I think women tried to break in by seeming as unthreatening and as similar to that male model as possible, right? And, I remember even when I started my faculty career, it was like, don't talk about your kids. Like, don't talk about, don't draw attention to the fact that you're different. And what I've learned over time is that I'm, advanced enough in my career and stable enough in my career that I have the luxury of saying, I want to show a different model. So I talk about my kids in class. And I do that in part because I want the young women in my class to know that no, you can be a professor or an engineer and still be a mom. But I also want the young men to know that I I'm doing both, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I want the young men, I used to think the most important thing I could do was to be a role model for young women.
Mm-hmm.
Think that that's important, but I actually think in a lot of ways the value is in being a role model for young men. And that there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of young men who I have worked with and have trained them, in research and whatnot, for whom it's not strange to have your boss be female. It's not strange for your boss to talk about her kids. It's not strange for your boss to bring you chicken soup because she knows you've been sick and it's a nice thing to do. Um, and I've also noticed that as I'm in groups more and more, but have some level of power and authority, that I find more men acting what I would consider to be the more, you know, find men who are excited when I bring up my kids because they want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about their
Oh.
kids,
Oh,
and that they are the ones picking up from daycare and stressed because school got closed. And we don't all have to have kids, and we don't have to all have to not have kids. But I think as a woman, one of the things that I feel really good about is that I'm just modeling a way that's not better, but it's not worse. It's just different. And there's room at the table for us in different ways. And I think being a mom made me a better teacher. I think it made me more empathetic. I think it made me more flexible. I think it's made me more approachable. And so it's okay.
I'm so glad that you brought it up because I also do believe that while it is important to be a good model for other women, it is also just as important to like explain this to men so that they can have the mindset that it's normal and that it's good. I think that it should be talked more because I feel like it could help future generations in breaking gender stereotypes. And I find it really cool how you're doing this all at once.
I hope that this is helpful for
mhm.
some of your classmates, and
Right.
give yourself a break. Have a nice relaxing weekend.
Yeah,
Recognize that you've accomplished a lot of things, and
right.
and and go blue. I have to say, we have to say
Go.
it for Michigan, go blue.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Since we are running out of time, this also marks the end of this episode of STEM Sesh. I hope you enjoyed it and you had a great time too, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to watch us. It means a lot to us. And a big thank you to Amy for being our guest speaker for today.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I do have one last question slash request for Amy. Amy, if you would like to promote anything, you can do it now. This can be anything from important projects to organizations to resources for aspiring engineers.
Oh, that's great. So definitely, the Society of Women Engineers, is a great group, and I think really well worth getting involved in if you have a local chapter or looking to the national chapter. And I'm going to put in the chat my lab. Just you can go to our website if you want to learn more about industrial engineering and healthcare. And we're always happy to answer people's questions.
Okay, once again, thank you so much, Amy, for being here to answer our questions. Oh, and by the way, we'll be doing more episodes of STEM Sesh and other events in the future, so keep an eye out for those by following our social media to be updated.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye!